Blog Talk Radio.
Choices, decisions, frustrations, and pain. Knowing I'm going to forget her someday. While I still can, I'll challenge all my loved ones, every friend, to look inside their hearts and understand that I will love them. I will love them while I still can.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm your host and founder of Alzheimer Speaks, Lori LeBay. So welcome today. We're going to have a fabulous show. Today we're going to change up our format a little bit. We've got 3 different guests for you, and I know it's going to be a really informative show. But before I go ahead and introduce our guests, I, again, always like to let people know a little bit about Alzheimer Speaks and what we're about, because we are always getting new listeners. And I have to thank our audience in terms of sharing us, because that's how people find out about us. So, again, thank you for all of your likes and clicks and shares out there. When you see this posted, it really is making a difference in others' lives when you share the program with someone else. So big impact. For those of you that are new to our show, Alzheimer Speaks is an advocacy-based company, and we provide multiple platforms to shift our dementia care culture from crisis to comfort around the world. We're all about trying to connect the dots and get people the services, products, and tools that they need, and it seems like they're hidden in cubby holes that we don't know about. So it's really all about raising voice and joining forces and sharing knowledge and just having these everyday conversations about life with dementia, because we need to remove the stigmas. The isolation just cannot continue. People need our help, and they need and have the right to live with dignity and purpose. So Alzheimer Speaks is really about teaching people how to live with the disease, not as it. And we know we're doing something right, because ShareCare and Dr. Oz recognized us as the #1 influencer online for Alzheimer's disease, which was quite the honor. And again, that has nothing to do with me or Alzheimer Speaks. It has to do with all of our listeners, all of our supporters on all of our platforms. Again, finding value and sharing the information. And it's really interesting. Sometimes people think, well, you know, my group doesn't, we don't talk about that, so I'm not going to share that information. And I would pose this to you. Think twice. How many people do you know or have you found out that are dealing with dementia that you didn't know before? Open the door for them. And, again, just click. It doesn't take any time, doesn't cost you any money, but you could change someone's life to helping them find the resources that they need. So, again, we're just all about raising awareness and helping those with memory loss and those that care for them, as well as those that just want to learn more. It's time society becomes dementia-friendly. And, we can do that in a variety of fashions. The Purple Angel Project, if you haven't heard about that, is a fantastic way to show your support for dementia. And you can just go to thepurpleangel.org.uk and find out all about how yourself or you as your company can go ahead and use this logo and help with dementia awareness. There are other organizations, too. For example, the Alzheimer's Disease International is the organization of all Alzheimer's associations around the world. So if you're dealing with Alzheimer's, it's a great resource. Today we're going to have on the Lewy Body Dementia Association, which is just a fantastic organization, and I'll let Angela tell us more about that. And there's also an organization called the Association of Frontal Temporal Degeneration, or a lot of people refer to it as frontal temporal lobe dementia. And those are probably some of the most common forms of the disease. And so, again, resources out there for all of you. Many people also are asking me about trials, and again, the Tau trial that is out can be found at the Alzheimer's Studies.com, or you can look for the Alzheimer's team on Facebook and find information there. And then for a few fun resources, Music First with Choral Health has downloadable music, which is a great way to be able to kind of shift moods and distract. We all use music in our life. Why not continue that with dementia? And then Puzzle With Me is an organization that has some fabulous larger puzzles, smaller number, easier to hold, and are pertinent to an older population as well. And then Jiminy Wickett's going to be with us with Jim Creasey, and I'll let him talk about his organization a little bit later here. But why don't I go ahead and introduce our first guest here. Again, the Lewy Body Dementia Association is who Angela Taylor is the director of programs for, and they are a nonprofit organization dedicated to raising awareness of Lewy body dementia, and to be able to support people afflicted with Lewy body as well as their families and caregivers. And they also, of course, promote scientific advancement. And they are, again, a charitable organization, but they also focus heavily on education. Angela herself is, again, the director of programs for the organization, and in 2004 is when she joined the Lewy Body Dementia Association as a member. And then she ended up being part of the board of directors when she was a caregiver for her father, who also had Lewy body. Now she oversees all their programs and services, and she has been with us on the show before, and I'm so thrilled to have her back again with us. Angela, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, Lori. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's absolutely gorgeous here in Minnesota, so very nice. I just want my house put back together. We're still painting and carpeting after a fire, so I have boxes all over. But other than that, life is good. So
well, I'm glad that you're on the upswing now, and that things are starting to feel more like home.
Yep, definitely. Well, now you started this whole role because, of a family member. Can you give our audience just a little more background in terms of however, who it was in your family, and how long they had it, and what made you search out the Lewy Body Association?
Oh, I'll be happy to. My father was the person in my life who had Lewy body dementia, but we didn't know until he was diagnosed even that this disorder existed. He started dealing with some what we thought were memory problems. When he was in his, I'd say, early 60s, he was having problems doing things that were more complicated tasks, working on his computer, dealing with managing a large household project, for example, a lot of things that required a lot of executive thinking or executive function skills like analysis and planning and understanding how things work together. And it just wasn't like my dad because he was an engineer, and Dad always understood how things worked. So we were a little concerned, and over time just kind of observed what was going on. They were very subtle changes at the beginning, just problems with programming a VCR, for example, something out of the blue that we didn't expect him to have problems with. And over time, those things started to happen a little bit more frequently, and it became kind of more common. And at that stage of the game, we started to talk with him about talking to his doctor. And it took us probably 2 years from the time we saw the very earliest signs to when we really were involved in discussions with his doctor, because like a lot of disorders that are neurodegenerative, the signs are very subtle at first, and eventually you realize something seems to be terribly wrong. So he was initially diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment. He didn't qualify as having dementia. He was still able to live independently, even though there were things he couldn't do well any longer. And when we were in to see the neurologist for the first time, Dad also explained he was having these nightmares. Every night he was having problems sleeping because he was having these very frightening dreams. And he found himself acting these dreams out. And the doctor said, oh, well, that's a common sleep disorder called REM for rapid eye movement, sleep behavior disorder. And I can just treat that with one pill at bedtime, and that will be fine, and that'll go away. So we left the doctor's office thinking, okay, we're feeling a little bit of relief. He doesn't have Alzheimer's disease. But over the course of the next year, things continued to progress, and eventually he went in for more detailed neuropsychological tests, and those tests revealed that he indeed had a different form of cognitive impairment. It wasn't memory-based. It was indeed more related to planning and abstract thinking, and that it was more resembling Lewy body dementia. So that's when we really learned about the disease in trying to research what his symptoms were and getting this final, more significant cognitive testing done.
Okay. Well, and it's not uncommon with any form of dementia to get misdiagnosed. Yeah, I hear that all the time because the variables just change and they mask so many other symptoms and things. But it can be extremely frustrating for both the patient and the family. As you're trying to go through this route. As far as time frame, a lot of people say it can take a year or 2 years to get diagnosed. How long do you think it took your family for your dad's diagnosis?
From the time we first started talking to his family physician about what, again, we called his memory, it was probably 2 to 3 years, because we didn't have enough symptoms to put the pieces together to identify Lewy body dementia in the beginning. In the beginning, it was just 1 or 2 small things, and so it really took time for enough symptoms to manifest themselves and for him to reach the point where he was no longer able to live independently. You can't be diagnosed with Lewy body dementia unless you have dementia. So, that first year was probably mild cognitive impairment only, and then the next year we were dealing with more significant changes, which required he no longer live alone, and other symptoms started to become more apparent, the types of cognitive changes, certainly this sleep disorder. And he had real variations in his ability to do things from day to day and to pay attention. His alertness would change. And that's one of the core symptoms of Lewy body dementia that also helped to put the puzzle together. But the typical LBD family will see at least 3 doctors over the course of a year or more before they receive an LBD diagnosis. And ours was just like that. We started with the family physician, then we went to the neurologist, then we went to the neuropsychologist, and eventually that's when we got a formal diagnosis.
Okay. Can you tell, I know you're not a doctor, but can you tell our audience, what exactly is Lewy body? How is it different from Alzheimer's disease and the other forms of dementia?
I'll be happy to. LBD, as we call Lewy body dementia, is a progressive brain disorder. And like Alzheimer's and like Parkinson's, it will progress over time. There are medications that are used to treat it to help reduce the symptoms, but that doesn't change the progression of the disease. LBD affects thinking, movement, and behavior, where compared to Alzheimer's disease, it's really more of a memory and cognitive condition at the beginning. So people with LBD have a more complex array of symptoms generally earlier in the disorder. It is the second most common form of progressive dementia, and we estimate that it affects about 1.3 million Americans, plus their entire families. So there are millions of people who are struggling with this. It may seem like it's a rare disorder because most people haven't heard of it, but the reality is it's a relatively young disease as dementias go. It wasn't really well understood until the 1980s when they started to see how much more common it was. The symptoms of LBD, as I mentioned, everybody has to have dementia. They have to have enough changes in their cognitive abilities that it impairs their ability to do everyday activities like hold a job, manage their finances, manage medications, and things like that. In addition to dementia, people with LBD have changes in their movement that resemble Parkinson's disease. And that might manifest itself in muscle stiffness or rigidity, where their movements become slow. They may have changes in the way they walk, where their steps become smaller. They don't pick up their feet very well. They might shuffle them. And changes in that walking or gait is very indicative of Lewy body dementia over Alzheimer's disease. Some people with LBD also have visual hallucinations early in the disorder, and that's a very big indicator that this might be LBD and not Alzheimer's. People with Alzheimer's disease might have hallucinations later in the disorder, but it's not part of the early part of Alzheimer's disease. And so if somebody is seeing things that are not real, that's a big warning sign.
Okay.
LBD also has this sleep disorder that I mentioned, REM, sleep behavior disorder, where when you and I go to sleep, we don't physically act out our dreams. Our body is actually immobilized. In our dreams, it might feel like we're moving, but we're not physically moving. In LBD, people will thrash and move about in their dreams, and when they have these dreams, they can injure themselves, or they can injure the person they're sharing a bed with. And often they don't themselves realize that they are making all of these movements or talking in their sleep or things like that. So sometimes the bed partner is the best person to report whether they have the sleep disorder or not. People with LBD also have varying changes of attention and alertness and cognitive ability that kind of waxes and wanes without reason. You can't predict from one day to another, or sometimes even 1 hour to another, what their abilities will be, because they just seem to lose that ability to connect the dots on how to do certain things. So everybody with LBD has a slightly different experience. So we can't say that all people with LBD look alike at the beginning, and in fact, that's one of the reasons diagnosis is challenging, because in order to be diagnosed with LBD, you have to have dementia plus at least 2 of the other symptoms, but it doesn't mean that it's always the same 2 symptoms. So a doctor may not see people with the same presentation and be able to recognize it immediately the next time, because each person's experience is a little bit different.
Okay. Now, we do have a question from the audience, and they're asking, how common is it for people to have both Lewy body dementia and Alzheimer's disease? And are there special concerns about adverse interactions between prescriptions for individuals that have both?
That's an excellent question. We're not yet sure why, but what we know is that when one person has some kind of neurodegenerative brain disorder, they seem to be at risk to developing more than one. And so it's not just Alzheimer's and LBD that can coexist together, but it could be Alzheimer's and vascular dementia, or vascular disease where they're having small strokes in the brain. It certainly could be Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease where they're having 2 different kinds of biological changes in the brain. So most people who have LBD seem to have some degree of Alzheimer's changes in their brains as well. That doesn't mean that they have the clinical symptoms, that they look and act like they have Alzheimer's disease, but they might have a certain degree of that pathology or that brain disease at the cellular level. It is less common that people have pure Lewy body disease and no coexisting Alzheimer's pathology. But when it comes to treatment, there really are no differences. So the more common form is a mixed dementia, Lewy bodies and Alzheimer's, but generally one or the other disease process drives most of the symptoms. So they will largely look more like Lewy body dementia, or they will largely look more like Alzheimer's disease, simply because one of the diseases is more prevalent in the brain.
Okay. Why is it that we just don't hear that much about Lewy body compared to, Alzheimer's? Everybody thinks every form of dementia is Alzheimer's. Why is that? Well,
as I mentioned, LBD wasn't really well understood until the 1980s when they developed a new staining technique that allowed them to see how much more widely Lewy bodies, which are these little misfolded protein deposits, actually are in the brains of people with dementia. They really thought it only affected a smaller number of people. And so from a diagnostic standpoint, the cutting-edge research takes a long time to trickle down into everyday research or everyday clinical practice. And so, it took about 10 years for the diagnostic criteria to be published by the research community after that. And then slowly but surely it started to gain, there was more physician education that took place on LBD, and now we're seeing people with LBD being diagnosed very, very regularly by their neurologists. They are not being diagnosed regularly by their primary care physician yet because, again, it's a more complex disorder. It takes generally somebody who spends more time looking at neurological diseases and has that at top of mind. But the patient base of both disorders are very different. Alzheimer's disease affects 3 to 4 times more people than Lewy body dementia. The Alzheimer's Association says over 5 million people are estimated to have Alzheimer's disease in America. So it's simply a much more prevalent disease. And it also, the Alzheimer's Association has done a wonderful job over the last 40 years or so of raising public awareness about Alzheimer's. Our organization is much, much younger and smaller. So over time, as we grow, we hope, too, that we'll be able to make a lot more we'll be able to raise a lot more public awareness about Lewy body dementia.
Well, great. Well, again, I thank you so much for being on the show because I think it's such a huge, huge need. Now, a lot of times people think that Lewy body is Parkinson's. What can you tell us about the similarities and the differences between the two? Because I hear people say that all the time. Well, it's the same thing. And I'm like, no, not so much.
They are similar. There are definitely similarities. For example, in biology, they both have the same biological changes in the brain. But in Parkinson's disease, it starts in a different place in the brain. And in Lewy body dementia, it starts largely in a different place. The brainstem is where, or the substantia nigra is where the Lewy bodies appear first in Parkinson's disease, and largely that's what drives motor symptoms. So they have very similar motor symptoms, but in Parkinson's disease, it starts as primarily a motor disorder and then has other related symptoms. In Lewy body dementia, it generally starts as a cognitive disorder that also has some movement symptoms. But I want to highlight that Parkinson's disease also progresses in older adults. Most people who have Parkinson's will develop some degree of cognitive impairment, and many of them will develop dementia. And this dementia, because it has the same underlying biology, is considered Lewy body dementia. It's called Parkinson's disease dementia when it happens, but we refer to both Parkinson's disease dementia, when the movement disorder starts first, as a part of the same spectrum as dementia with Lewy bodies, which is the official name when dementia starts first and the person then develops other LBD symptoms. We include both of these clinical syndromes under the umbrella of Lewy body dementia. But the difference is the order in which the symptoms appear. So in Parkinson's disease, you have motor symptoms first that lead to a Parkinson's diagnosis, and then at least a year or more later, sometimes many years, the person develops cognitive impairment and dementia, and then it's diagnosed as Parkinson's disease dementia, where in dementia with Lewy bodies, the cognitive symptom is the prevailing early symptom, along with changes in movement, perhaps behavior, perhaps sleep, and then over time, their Parkinsonism will progress and get worse. And by the time both of these disorders are at end stage, the symptoms are very, very, very similar. In fact, the brains look almost indistinguishable at end stage in both forms of Lewy body dementia.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you. Is there, how do I want to say, well, let me ask this question first. How did Lewy body get its name? Because it's kind of a goofy name. Everyone's like, where did that come from? Not like Alzheimer's is a everyday name either, but
it is. It's actually the name of the man who identified these little protein deposits first. Dr. Friedrich Lewy was a contemporary of Dr. Alzheimer's, and they both worked in a lab in Germany. And that was around the turn of the century. And he was doing autopsies of individuals who had Parkinson's disease. And he observed these little protein deposits in people with Parkinson's. It wasn't until many years later that it became known as a Lewy body. Other researchers began to call them Lewy bodies. He did not name them. And over time, those Lewy bodies then also became associated with this progressive dementia as well. And thus the name Lewy body dementia came about.
Okay, so just another doctor's name. Okay.
It is. It's a very cumbersome name. It's also a very cumbersome disorder.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's so challenging, on so many different levels. What are the most frustrating things that you hear from people that have the disease? What frustrates them the most about the disease?
Well, I think that the families struggle both because of the symptoms of the disease, but also because of the low awareness. There's a tremendous need to have greater understanding of Lewy body dementia among healthcare professionals. And I think, if you ask families that's one of the biggest challenges, that they'll go into an emergency room and people in the emergency room won't be familiar with LBD, nor will they know that people with LBD have some medication sensitivities that people with Alzheimer's disease may not have. Symptoms, LBD, one of the symptoms is hallucinations. But the very medications that doctors have to treat hallucinations can be very dangerous to people with LBD, especially one class, the older traditional antipsychotic medications like haloperidol cannot be used safely in LBD because those people tend to have very severe reactions to them, where a person with Alzheimer's disease would not have that same reaction. So doctors have to be very careful in administering certain classes of drugs to people with LBD. And so low physician awareness outside of specialists has become a real problem. As far as living with the disorder itself, I think the behavioral changes really are the most difficult for the families. Visual hallucinations are one part of it, but people with LBD they really struggle with delusions, where they think one thing is happening that really isn't. They have a very firm, fixed belief that something is occurring or that something has happened, and they can't shake it. And you can't convince them that they're wrong. And so that can cause all sorts of behavioral challenges and anxiety and distress in the family. So I would say the behavioral symptoms are probably some of the most difficult.
Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Can you tell people, well, actually, you know what, we've got a caller on the line. Why don't I go ahead and pull them in, and then I'll ask my next question. Let me get them live here. Hi, I've got a caller from a 215 number. You're live on the air. If you'd state your name and ask your question or make your comment.
My name is Michael Ellenbogen, and I'm calling to speak with Angela Taylor there. How you doing, Angela?
I'm fine, Michael. How are you?
Good, good. I'd like to thank, what your organization is doing, the Lewy Body Association. My call today is really about the Purple Angel. I think you've heard about that, and I'm trying to understand if your organization is considering to come on board with this particular cause. We're trying to get people from, all over the world to come on board to support dementia, no matter what type of dementia people have. And one of them, of course, is Lewy Body, which we'd love to have your organization to support the Purple Angel and to stand behind that. We're trying to create one common goal for everybody, no matter what type of dementia they have. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Hi, Michael. Well, listen, I have great admiration for what you're doing with that program. I think that it's a wonderful idea, and really having a common banner is really, I think, unites people and the experiences that they have, regardless of the form of dementia. I think one of the things we see all too often, as Lori alluded to, is that people really often think that all dementia is Alzheimer's disease. And I think one of the things our organization is trying to highlight really is that there are good reasons to look at the specific forms of dementia as unique entities. Because they have different treatment issues, they also have different impacts on the family and challenges. So we are very interested in looking more at your program. We have lots of things that we're doing, and I think, over time there certainly may be some opportunity for us to get involved. I don't know that we've had enough opportunity internally to really explore it yet, so we definitely look forward to doing that.
Great. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you, and congratulations to you on the progress that you guys are making with it.
Thanks for calling in, Michael. Appreciate it. Well, I'm a huge believer in the Purple Angel Project, and part of it has to do with my 30-year journey, with my mom and the lack of education and getting people to understand that there are, I personally think by using one symbol, we're going to be able to be stronger and pull all the variables together so that people can stand up and apart, but yet still join hands and move forward. They're just doing miraculous things over in the UK with it. It's absolutely phenomenal. And, Gary, I don't know if you're familiar with Gary LeBlanc, but he is doing a wristband project that kicked off in Florida that's expanding to other hospitals now in terms of getting hospital workers to understand when they see that symbol, they need to dig deeper. And that Absolutely. They need different skills. And so, and it's not something that says dementia on it. It's just a symbol, so it's dignified, but it will alert and, help educate people. And to me, that's the number one force. If we're really going to become dementia friendly, we have to band together the silos, even though it's very important for us to have all these different organizations, don't get me wrong there. And I think actually by joining the Purple Angel, I think it could really raise the Lewy Body Association profile in a lot of ways, because I talk to so many people, and they just, it shocks me how many people don't even know about the diagnosis. And they don't know to ask their doctors, and their doctors don't know, they're not getting to the right people. And so that's my 2 cents, if you wanted it or not.
Right. Well, we find one of the challenges is that so many people don't have access to neurologists. They live in small towns and whatnot. They may not have neurologists in their community. And, that's one of the big challenges with the lesser-known dementias is that, they may be viewed as simply having Alzheimer's disease, or if they have changes in movement, they may be viewed as simply having Parkinson's disease, where in truth they may have a much more complex disorder that the family would then be wholly unprepared to address. So, I definitely think that there's a great role for primary care providers to become very conversant in the top 4 or so causes for dementia.
Yeah, huge need out there. Huge need, and we're getting there. We're making our little sideways angles in on the crossroads here with the disease, little by little. But well, can you give our listening audience an idea of the progression of this disease? What can people expect if they, and maybe they're worried about themselves, maybe it's about a family member or a friend. What's the typical progression?
That's a great question. And as I mentioned earlier, the individual experiences with the disease are varied, and some people can have a very slow progression. My dad was a great example. We saw symptoms of LBD years before he got diagnosed, and he lived for about 8 years after being diagnosed. So his experience was at least 10 years. For most people, from the time that they're diagnosed and understanding that they may have symptoms for a year or 2 or 3 before they get there, the average lifespan is about 5 to 8 years. Some people live much longer. Like in Alzheimer's disease, you can live, 10, 12, 15 years, even as long as 20 years if you have a very slow progression. Most cases are under 10 years. On a very small number of cases, for those who have the pure Lewy body dementia, those cases tend to go more rapidly, and they can be, from the time of diagnosis, as short as a year or 2. And so getting that diagnosis allows you to be prepared for what the spectrum of lifespan might be. There are no well-defined stages of Lewy body dementia yet, again, because the symptoms present themselves at different times and in different severities. And so we can't say that the first symptom you'll always see is dementia. Well, that's not true. Some people start with a sleep behavior disorder 10 or even 20 years before having any signs of cognitive impairment. Some people start with hallucinations around the time they start with dementia, but might not have Parkinsonism for years. And so each case, again, has some variability to it. What I would say is that, if you want to break the disease into stages, you kind of have that diagnostic stage where the person is living independently or transitioning to no longer being independent, where you're really starting to put the pieces together. They have a very strong quality of life in that time, but they are definitely going through changes that require they get more and more help. The middle stage of the disease tends to be fairly challenging with the behavioral changes, where not only are they dealing with cognitive changes, but also changes in movement, changes in behavior. They might have depression, apathy, certainly delusions and hallucinations are very, very common. And they're still physically relatively strong, and then they move into the later part of the disease where they start to lose that physical health, where they are more stiff and rigid. They don't have the strength to stand and walk independently any longer or to move from a chair to a bed. They really are becoming more cognitively impaired, where it's harder to interact with them and get responses from them. And, of course, as in everything else that's a progressive disorder, eventually they reach end stage and they are in bed, and it's a difficult time for the family. So that's the general progression of the disorder, but as far as being able to really clearly define those stages, research hasn't been able to do that quite yet.
Yeah, and I found that I get really frustrated with the stages because I feel like it just pinholes people, and I've just seen too many exceptions to the rule. And, there's the saying, when you've seen one person with Alzheimer's, you've seen one person with Alzheimer's, and it really is when you've seen one person with any form of dementia, you've seen one person with a form of, dementia, and that's it. We do have another question from a listener, and they are asking, are there any gender-based or base differences in rates of Lewy body? So roughly 2/3 of people with AD are women and African American. are twice as likely as Caucasians to develop, Alzheimer's disease. So are you seeing anything that's gender-based or, in terms of our culture where...
Yes, definitely. We know that there are slightly more men than women who have LBD. There was a recent study that really looked at a particular community over a period of 15 years to see how many new cases of Lewy body dementia were reported in that community by symptoms, not so much by clinical diagnosis. Mm-hmm. And that definitely showed that men were much more likely to have Lewy body dementia in that study than women, and that they tended to be, those who had the cognitive onset tended to be younger than those who had the Parkinson's disease onset that later progressed to dementia. So that was very interesting. We haven't had enough research yet to really identify how race and ethnicity has affects prevalence of the disorder. DLB still isn't, dementia with Lewy bodies isn't as broadly diagnosed yet as it needs to be in order to be able to do those studies.
Okay. Well, and it is interesting because, people are always wondering, about race and ethnicity. I can't say that word. I keep wanting to say authenticity, and that's not right. So I'm going to say race. It's just like I'm tongue-tied today. But it is interesting, the breakdowns. But, again, we can't do that if we don't have the funds for the research to really dive into all of this and in terms of raising awareness. Here's another question. What are the possible explanations for men being more likely than women to develop Lewy body dementia?
Oh, boy.
Any theories there?
I'm not sure I can answer that question. What it may have to do with, it could be something in the genetics, because we know that different genetic variations can increase a person's risk of certain disorders, and so it could be that men tend to have more of a particular genetic variation. It could be a combination of genetics and environment, and so, exposure to certain chemicals or other environmental factors might be more common in men. It's going to take a long time before we can really articulate why. But it does lend the question of, is there something different in the pathology, in the underlying disease that men are at more risk for? Mm-hmm. So we have questions. We don't have answers on that, to my knowledge.
Okay. And listener, if you have a theory, we'd love to hear it. Feel free to call in and pose your question or make your comment at 714-364-4757. That's 714-364-4757. We always love to hear from our listeners. I am just learning so much today, and I'm sure our listeners are as well. I just find this fascinating and a conversation that needs to be had, on more levels. Now, what types of resources are available to people with Lewy body dementia, and their families as well? Maybe they're separate, maybe they're together. Can you kind of explain what's available to people?
Well, let me first start about what they need, and then we'll also talk about what they can find at LBDA. Obviously, people who are dealing with LBD need to make sure that they have a really strong clinician, a doctor that they work with who is really willing to listen to their concerns and is willing to delve deeply to look at the diagnostic and the treatment challenges with LBD. They're going to need a lot of support in their life. The entire family, the person with the disease and their primary caregiver. It's the challenge in caring for a person with LBD is pretty broad. It affects a lot of areas of that person's life, and so it can be fairly consuming for a family caregiver. So there's resources in their community that we really encourage people to look for, such as home health aides to help supplement the care that the family caregiver might give. They might find that they need some respite care services so that the caregiver can take a few days off and maybe somebody else comes in to take care of the person for a few days, or maybe they move into a temporary care situation with a long-term care residence. Some people find adult day programs are very helpful so that the caregiver can continue to work and the person with LBD has a supportive environment during the daytime for socialization and activities if they're finding it hard to find meaningful activities at home on their own. Certainly some people find that long-term care is needed. Providing care 24/7 at home by a single caregiver might be more than a single person can do. But we really encourage families to build a support network, and LBDA can play a big role in that. We have services that they can learn about on our website that allow them to connect one-to-one with other LBD caregivers and also in group settings. So we have, a growing network of community-based support groups for Lewy body dementia or groups that support several forms of dementia that we collaborate with. We also have our LBD caregiver link, which is kind of a one-to-one resource where people can call in and leave a question, and we will connect them with another LBD caregiver who is also an LBDA volunteer, so they can talk on the phone or by email and get some answers to their questions about what experiences and challenges they are facing at home. And it's just really, really nice to have somebody who really has walked in the same shoes be able to share back and forth with you about how they handled certain situations.
Wonderful.
Our website has a wealth of educational information, and I certainly think that's the other thing that families really, really need, is they need to become fully informed about their disorder and to be prepared to educate not just their friends or family, but healthcare providers in their community. There are many people who don't have LBD cross their path as their normal, everyday part of their job. But if they're caring for your loved one who has LBD, you certainly want them to be informed. So, becoming informed about the disease, knowing you're going to need to serve as an advocate and an educator, we can help with that.
Okay, wonderful. Now, I know that you do you have all kinds of things on the website that I wanted to talk about, if you don't mind, because I think you're just doing some really, really cool things. But before I get into that, we do have one more question here from our audience, and they are wondering, how can people find Lewy body dementia clinical trials, or can people sign up for a registry to learn more, about the future trials? Are there some going on right now?
Well, clinicaltrials.gov is a great website for people to seek clinical trials in their geographic area. The challenge with LBD is that there really aren't very many clinical trials out there that are specific to this disorder. There are clinical trials that are out there looking at related disorders or that are common to symptoms that are in LBD. And so for families who want to help advance the knowledge of neurodegenerative diseases, we definitely encourage them to look at participating in clinical trials. I think, given the fact that LBD wasn't well diagnosed or wasn't well defined until the 1980s and 1990s, research still is making progress in certain key areas that are required in order to have clinical trials really be prevalent. And that includes being able to diagnose the disorder well. So we need something called biomarkers, and a biomarker is basically a biological indicator that you can measure. A cholesterol test is a good example of a biomarker for heart disease. You can measure it, you know when it's too high, and you know how, when you treat it, that you can lower it. Well, we don't have those easy biomarkers in LBD yet developed that would be good targets for drug trials. And so it's going to take more time before clinical trials are really prevalent. I absolutely encourage families to go to clinicaltrials.gov and to find trials in their area that their family member might qualify for, because, again, they might find access to strong clinicians through that. Researchers are really cutting edge, and that gives them an opportunity perhaps to work with a doctor who's much more specialized than somebody that they've worked with up to this point.
Okay. Well, great answer. Again, just shows we need more funding,
We definitely do.
in this area, it just it amazed me, when I listened to the settlement for the NFL basically is more money than what we have going towards just Alzheimer's disease, which gets more money than anybody in terms of dementia, as a whole, and it's a sad state that really needs to get corrected. Now, if a family wants to get involved with your organization, I would assume that you're looking for volunteers and advocates like the rest of the world with organizations. Is that correct?
Absolutely. There are a lot of things that volunteers can do with LBDA to help provide support to other LBD families and to raise public awareness and to help provide important resources to LBDA so that we can do things that, again, continue to lift the burden on the disease, such as more programming for education, more outreach, and also for research. So, we encourage people to go to our website and consider signing up for the LBD awareness movement. That is when in October, we've designated October as Awareness Month, and so we are mobilizing volunteers across the country to raise awareness about the disease in their community. And we've given them some great ideas on activities that they can do. We've given them some resources that they can self-print and distribute in their community. We've got a speaker's kit for people to go out and talk about the disease. So there's lots of things that are available. And so for anybody who wants to get started with our organization, that's a really easy way to get started because you can pick and choose your activities. But we have lots of other volunteers activities like running support groups. So we'd love to have more help.
Great. Well, that's wonderful. I think it's the only way we're going to make change is if people do step up to the plate and get involved. And, again, this is a great cause, and if you've been touched with it, you know how important it is to be able to make these connections. Now, you do some webinars and things for people. Is there a fee for that, or are those free?
Our webinars are free. We work with experts in the research and clinical communities to bring presentations to our and family caregivers and allied healthcare professionals on a variety of topics that are relevant to LBD. We don't have one currently scheduled on our website. We are just getting ready to start talking about 2014. We've just finished our last one for the year. That last one was on caring for the family caregiver. And we worked directly with LBD caregivers to talk more about what their experience is and what advice they have for other caregivers. So we find that this is a very, very useful medium. We actually post the webinars on YouTube. People can search for us under LBDA TV on YouTube and find our archives of our webinars.
Oh, wonderful. Well, that's nice to be able to have that kind of access. Now, you also have a monthly newsletter that people can sign up for, and I know sometimes it's hard because we get bombarded with things. But again, if you're in this space, what a better way to gain knowledge from an organization that specializes in this disease, or if you are working in the industry, because there's so many unknowns. I would encourage people to sign up for that. And again, get out there and like and Facebook. You can help them on Twitter. The whole 9 yards. There, just go to the site. Everything is easy to access there. Now, there's something called LBDstories.com. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that?
Certainly. We put that site together because we wanted to provide families with a way to share their own personal stories and photos about what it's like to have LBD touch your life. We really wanted to put a face on the disease, talk about true stories, and so we have wonderful stories that have been posted there. We have some sad and challenging stories that are posted there too. It's really about the full spectrum of how this disease impacts our lives, the caregiving challenges, the emotional transitions, the shifting in roles, the barriers to clinical care and diagnosis. Every kind of story imaginable is out there. And so, if people are living with LBD and they feel like, they have something that they want to share with the world, we absolutely encourage them to go and upload a story and add a photo. We want to share your stories.
Okay, great. And, people want to share their stories. That's one thing I've done on Alzheimer's Speaks, where people can upload their stories, or if they don't have a link or a blog or whatever, they can send them to me, and I'll put them in PDF form and push them out also on the website. And what I found is people are so appreciative to have their stories be heard and to be read. I cannot believe the comments that I get from people regarding that. It's such a healing process to be able to share your story, and I think that sometimes it's really overlooked how beneficial that can be, not only for the person writing, but for others, to make them not feel like they're alone on this journey, and they glean information from those stories. And really, you are passing on hope as a survivor living with this disease, or any
Absolutely.
of the dementias. It's really... Mm-hmm.
I know you can't see me. I'm sitting here shaking and nodding my head, saying absolutely. As you said at the beginning, there's such a sense of isolation when we are caregiving and living with dementia that we think sometimes nobody else understands what we're going through. We think we're the only ones facing some of these challenges. And in reading those other stories, we see shades of our own life, and we go, oh, I am not crazy. Look, somebody else is dealing with this. There are so many conflicting emotions that come when dementia touches your life. The grieving is married up at strange times with enormous tenderness, moments of hilarity, and depth of love. But it's also extremely painful at the same time. So, those conflicting emotions really, they make us shake our head and sometimes feel like we must be going just a little bit crazy. And when we read those stories of other people and we share our own stories, absolutely, it's a healing thing.
Yeah, it really is huge. I had somebody send me a story, or I didn't have them send me. They sent me a story this weekend, and I was laying in bed checking my emails, and I just have tears just streaming down my face. It was just such a powerful story, and it was so beautiful. And so I asked, is it okay if I share it? And I'll be posting it. But it was just this beautiful, beautiful, story of caring for one another in the relationships. And just when you're at your rock bottom, and then this gift appears, right, and this connection, and quite powerful stuff. So don't underestimate your writing skills. Some people write poetry. I mean, it's all different types of things, and it's not about being perfect. It's just about putting it on paper and sometimes, or on your computer if you're not a paper person anymore. But it's just a way to release, from yourself. And you don't always have to share it with people, but, if the time is right, there are people that will want to read it. I can pretty much almost guarantee you that. Well, Angela, this hour has absolutely flown by so quickly. But before I let you go, I do want to talk about Lewy Body and your Scientific Advisory Council, because I think that that's an important avenue that people need to know about as well. So can you kind of give us a synopsis of that, what's going on there?
Certainly. Our Scientific Advisory Council is an international group of researchers and clinicians really on the cutting edge of Lewy body dementia. They are our eyes and ears in the scientific community. They do a tremendous amount of physician education in addition to their research and their work with LBD families. They are educators and working in universities, and they are strong advocates for the disease. And we work with them to ensure that our materials are scientifically sound. They help us award grants to very promising researchers. They also help us organize scientific meetings so that we can bring all of the best brains together to really look at the disease and to say what is next, what's on the horizon. Really excited that the National Institutes of Health are putting together a strategic plan for the non-Alzheimer's dementias right now. What needs to be done to advance Lewy body dementia and vascular disease and frontotemporal dementias strategically at the national level, so that all research is being done as methodically and as maximizing resources as much as possible. And we're very excited to see LBD included in that group. And a number of our Scientific Advisory Council members were very involved in that project as well. So we look forward to seeing that being released.
Great. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. If people want to donate to your cause or get more information that we've talked about, make connections, what is the best way for them to connect?
Definitely to visit our website. They can go to lbda.org, and at the top there's a donate button. They can also put in lbda.org/go/donate. Even small donations, they all add up, and they are what allow us to do our work. Without those $5, $10, $25 donations, we would not be able to touch as many lives as we do. And so I can't encourage people enough to consider giving to LBDA. The work we do has tremendous ramifications on LBD families, and we're very grateful for the support of the greater dementia community.
Well, great. Well, you have a wonderful week, and thank you so much for sharing such wonderful information with us today. I really personally learned a lot, and I've been in this space for a long time, but there's always more to learn, and I think that's one thing that we have to learn to accept in this space is nobody has all the answers. And
Absolutely.
It's always about connecting, and it's always about looking at things in a little bit different light. Hearing different voices just changes our perspective, and again gives us hope that we're not in this alone. So thank you so much for what you're doing and what your organization is doing, and I really hope that you'll be joining the Purple Angel Project soon. I think that would be a great way again to boost your visibility even more in terms of joining forces with that and helping people find you. So have a wonderful week, and I'm sure we'll have you on the show again.
Thank you so much, Lori. We truly appreciate the opportunity to share more about LBD with your listeners, and really, really look forward to working with you again in the future. And I wanted to give you just kudos from me as a family caregiver. You have taken such action yourself to really raise the bar on what is needed to serve dementia families nationally, and it really takes every single person doing what they can, and you are doing some absolutely wonderful work. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. You have a great week now.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Before I introduce our next guest, I do want to just highlight some things that you may have missed. So our last radio show was on brain nutrition and holistic ways to improve the quality of life, and our first guest was from Ireland, Creasey Fleming, and we did have some complications, and so that first hour might be a little tough to be able to listen to. The second half of the show was just wonderful with Darlene Kvitz, and learned a lot of great information about brain health on that show. Our next show coming up on the 1st, we're actually going to have the Frontal Temporal Lobe Association on with us, and that'll be a very, very good show. We also, if you haven't seen our last Dementia Chats, that's something that you might want to review. We talked about individual styles of advocacy and awareness, along with housing needs and costs of care. And then this afternoon, we will be having another Dementia Chats. That's a free webinar, which I do twice a month on the 2nd and 4th Tuesdays, and that's at 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, and noon Pacific time. We'd love to have you there. Our experts are those with dementia, and so it's a great opportunity. We always have a wonderful conversation between our audience and our experts. Some blog posts that I want to highlight is there was a really nice, elegant video done by Mark Shapiro, and I titled it One Son, Many Voices, but he talks about his dad and his Alzheimer's disease and how it's affected him and his dad and his family at large. There's also a great film that shares the global message of dementia and giving hope. And there was some I was very fortunate, Kathy Borey, who is an author of a book called Looking into Your Voice, The Poetic and Eccentric Realities of Alzheimer's, has for a week, she's offering her e-book with a minimum donation of $5, and all funds are going to Alzheimer's Speaks. So if that's of interest, you can find information on the blog there. And we are also going to be talking a little later today, though there's a lot of photos you can see, about the first adaptive croquet game played at the Rockefeller Center with Jiminy Wicket. I was out there with them on the 20th, which was really just a lot of fun. The last thing that I want to mention is the Griswold Home Care on Thursday, September 26th, is going to be doing a live webinar called Living with the Challenging Symptoms of Dementia. And again, you can go to alzheimerspeaks.com, and over to the right-hand side, you'll be able to see the blog. Just click on that and scroll down, and you'll find information regarding that. For those of you that are new to the show, I'm just going to highlight a few things. If you're looking for an Alzheimer's Association anywhere in the world, just go to Alzheimer's Disease International. For the Lewy Body Association, which we just had with us, again, that's right on this show page. You've got all of the contact information there. They're located on Facebook and the whole 9 yards. And then if you're looking for a study, there's a Tau trial out. You can go to alzheimersstudies.com or the Alzheimer's team on Facebook, and they can help you find that as well. So let me go ahead and roll into introducing our next guest. I'm really excited to have her with us today. Marie Marley is really a sought-after speaker and author, and she has written a really uplifting book called Come Back Early Today, and it's a memoir of love, Alzheimer's, and joy. And the book has been a finalist in several competitions, including a prestigious Santa Fe Writers Project Literary Awards. She also hosts her own blog, which has just a wealth of advice for Alzheimer's caregivers, and publishes a monthly newsletter for people caring for a loved one with Alzheimer's. The newsletter and the blog can both be accessed through her website, which is www.comebackearlytoday.com. Marie is the author of more than 150 articles on Alzheimer's caregiving, which some have been published in the Huffington Post and the Alzheimer's Reading Room with Bob DeMarco and Maria Shriver's website as well. So welcome, Marie. How are you doing today?
I'm fine. Excuse me. I'm fine, thank you. How are you doing, Lori?
Doing well, doing really well. I'm excited to have you here. I went to go grab your book, and my house is just in disarray from this fire. We've got boxes all over, and I was out of town, and I realized I couldn't get to it. So usually I like to have the book right in front of me, and but it's just a beautiful, beautiful book, and I'm excited to talk about it today with you. So can you start by telling our audience, why did you decide to write the book? Because I think there's a lot of people in our audience, think about it. They think that they've got a story. What prompted you to actually harness it and move forward?
Well, it started as one thing and actually ended up as a couple of other things. In the very beginning, I started writing it after my loved one, Ed, who had been my life partner for 30 years. After he passed away from Alzheimer's, I started writing the book, And it was a sort of therapy. It was a kind of way of keeping him alive in my mind. But then as the work progressed, it became this immensely creative outlet for me. And I was able to be as creative as I wanted to be, and artistic and literary, and I studied a lot of books on how to write a book. And so it became that. And when I started out the book, I intended it just as a memoir. I wanted to tell this love story. I wanted to share my love story with the world. And then, but as the book was published and the reviews started coming in on Amazon, many people mentioned how helpful it had been to them as caregivers, and other people mentioned that they wished they'd had it when they were caregivers. And so I like to say that I accidentally wrote as a resource for caregivers, and that's how it ended up. And I changed my marketing strategy. Instead of marketing it, it is a love story, but instead of focusing on the love story, I started focusing on how helpful it could be to Alzheimer's caregivers. And in fact, I was very touched. I received a handwritten letter from a lady in Coral Gables, Florida, saying that since my husband got Alzheimer's, I've gone to a lot of support groups, I've read some books, and I've attended a lot of courses, but yours was the only thing that gave me hope. And that focuses on the uplifting nature of the book. And it doesn't give advice to caregivers, but it models the solutions that I found and to various problems. And that's how it has been so helpful to people.
Well, and that gets to my point, and kind of the whole purpose of Alzheimer's Speaks is I think people want to learn how to live with this disease, and I think that's what your book shares, is that there are, you can still have a relationship. It's changed, but our relationships constantly change, and not letting the disease take that away from you. And I think that's one of the beauties of your book. It really does give voice to the strengths that relationship has, even in tenuous times that can be really trying with us all. Do you mind sharing with people, when you first maybe noticed something was wrong, and it was starting to change with Ed? What kind of symptoms did you see?
Well, there were a lot of little symptoms that occurred over a number of years. And, of course, I was in denial. And, for example, when he started mixing up names, I thought, well, he's just getting older. And when he couldn't remember his own address, I thought again, well, he's just getting older and his memory is fading. This is natural aging. Then he got to the point where he couldn't pay his bills, and he always paid his bills in the evenings, and he was Eastern European, so of course vodka was an important part of his life. And I thought, well, he's just had too much to drink tonight. And Ed got lost coming to my house, where he had been coming for 25 years at the time, 3 times in 6 months. And each time in my deep denial, I thought, well, it's just a temporary confusion. And even when he was found driving on the wrong side of the road, which is where the book opens, I thought that it was just because he was driving after dark. His eyesight was poor after dark, and he wasn't supposed to be driving after dark. And so I continued being in denial until finally, one evening, there was an incident that was so bizarre, so strange, so out of place, that I couldn't any longer deny the truth, that something serious was wrong with him. And here's what happened. He called me one night, sort of in a panic, looking for his scissors. And I told him to go look in his kitchen, because that's where he kept them. And he said, kitchen? What's a kitchen? I don't have a kitchen. And I was struck. It was as though I had been struck by lightning. And I said, you know, Ed, where your stove is. And he says, my stove. And he didn't know stove any more than he knew kitchen. And I said, I kept trying to jog his memory of what a kitchen was. And I couldn't. And finally he said, oh, how silly of me. I do have a kitchen. But it only has clothes and shoes in it. And I said, no, Ed, that's your closet. I'm talking about your kitchen. And I never could jog his memory. I never could get him to remember what his kitchen was. And that was the time that I knew for sure, and I had to admit and leave my denial and realize that there was something serious wrong with him.
Wow, that had to be awfully frightening for you.
Oh, it was terribly frightening. And I realized then that I was going to have to do something with him. He was living alone. And I realized that he wasn't going to be able to keep living alone, and that eventually I was able to get him to agree to move to a nursing home. And it was an outstanding facility that cared only for people with dementia. And it took me months and months to get him to agree to go. And I didn't want to, I had power of attorney. I could have taken him against his will, but I really, really didn't want to do that. And so I kept, really, it was a campaign of more or less badgering him every day to go to this place. I got him to visit a couple of times, and he liked it, and he agreed to go, but every time he backed out. And so finally, one day, he was so confused and so far advanced in his disease that he forgot his opposition to going to this place. And so I said one day, you would be so much better off if you would go to the Aloha Center. And he looked at me and he said, who's stopping me from going? And I said, nobody. And I took him the very next day before he could change his mind again. The other times I had waited until I had time to get his furniture moved and things taken care of. But this time they told me, you don't have to do all of that. Bring him tomorrow. Just bring him a few changes of clothes, and we can provide him with a furnished room until you can get his furniture moved. And I was delighted, and I did take him the very next day.
Wow, yeah, those moments. I mean, you kind of look at it as a gift, and then as a disaster as well when they reach that point of something that they've fought so long. I mean, it is a gift. You can move on, but then you just know that you're at a whole other level again in terms of the progression of the disease. I remember going through that with my mom, and it was a relief not to have to fight anymore. And so, how did he do when he went then? Was he good?
Well, they started him in what they called their assisted living area. They had 4 areas, and each one offered more care. So as the people continued to decline, they would move them from one area to another, which was wonderful because I knew I would never have to move him to another facility. They started him in their area of least care, which they called assisted living, and he lasted there for about a month. An interesting thing I should mention. The second day he was there, I was talking to him. I was visiting and talking to him, and he said, well, I'm going home tonight. And I told myself he will leave here only if one of us is dead, because it had been such a struggle to get him there. So, of course, he didn't leave. But he lasted only a month. He needed more help, and he was in the habit of taking his clothes off, all of his clothes, in the dining room, which, of course, he didn't know any better. And so they moved him to the next level, and he stayed there for quite a while, and then they moved him to their 3rd level, and that was where he was when he passed away. But what happened, once he got there, he was completely transformed. Previously, he was drinking heavily, he was depressed, he had become quite mean and verbally abusive to me, and it was very difficult to handle. But once he got into the nursing home and they got him off the alcohol, of course they wouldn't let him have any, and the doctor put him on an antidepressant, and he had other people around for social stimulation, and they got him interested in participating in activities, he was totally transformed into the most loving, lovable, sweet, adorable, happy people you'd ever want to meet, Alzheimer's or not. And so I was thrilled at that. And the rest of the time we had just a wonderful, warm relationship, even though it did change significantly as time went by.
Okay. Well, I thank you for sharing, all of this and your life and your love with Ed. I just think it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to be able to do. In your book, you talk about Ed's reaction to little stuffed animals that you took to him. Can you tell our audience about the stuffed animals?
Well, the stuffed animal started as more or less an accident, or happened serendipitously. I was going to visit him one day, and I stopped in at Walgreens to get some shampoo on my way. And on my way to the shampoo, I passed the aisle where the little stuffed animals were. And I stopped and I wondered, I wonder if Ed would like a stuffed animal. And then I thought, no, he'd just be offended that I brought him a child's toy. And so I went on and got my shampoo. But when I got up to the cash register, my heart told me to go back to the little stuffed animals. And so I did. And on a whim and against my better judgment, I bought him a tiny little yellow chick. And I got him the smallest one they had because I thought, silly of me, that if he got angry, he'd be less angry about a little one than he would about a big one. And so I took this little yellow chick out to him, and I put it in his hand. And at first, he didn't react at all. I had no idea what he was thinking. But I didn't have to wait long. Pretty soon, he held it up to his chest, and he petted it, and he kissed it. And he looked me right in the eyes, and he said, thank you. Thank you so much. I never had such a lovely present in all my life. And so I was delighted and relieved. And I went out on a limb further, and I said, would you like a bunny rabbit too? And he said, oh, I would love a bunny rabbit. He would be a companion for the little yellow one. And so the next day I took him a little bunny rabbit, which he promptly named Adorable. Then I had to go out in the hall for a minute, and when I went out, I had to talk to one of the nurses. When I went out, I put Adorable on the foot of Ed's bed. And when I came back in a few minutes later, I saw that he had put Adorable on his pillow. And he looked me in the eyes again, and he said, maybe I'm silly at my age, playing with these little stuffed animals, but I really do love them so much. And so I kept taking him stuffed animals, and he loved each one more than the one before. And every time I handed him one of the old ones, it was like it was the first time he had ever seen it. And one of the things that I got him after that was a little puppy that breathed. It was battery operated, and his little chest moved up and down. And he told me one time, the first thing I do when I come in my room is look and see if the little puppy is still breathing. And so I realized that we were having fun with these stuffed animals. And I finally realized that it was that just seeing him smile and hearing him laugh was more than enough to make up for losing our old relationship. And then I was transformed. And instead of being bored by my visits and not wanting to go because he couldn't interact with me in a way that was meaningful for me, I realized that I had to interact with him on his level. And so I was transformed as well, and I was able finally, after months and months and months, I was able to accept his condition.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. And it is a tough place to get to, you know, but once you're there, it's just like this, I don't know, I describe it as kind of soft and cushy and gooey, and it's just so lovable and so, it's kind of like, why wasn't I here before? You know, why couldn't I find this in my life earlier? Why did it take this? Because it really just brings you to this basic love and connection that's just you can't even put into words. And it's you know, for our audience, I guess I would encourage you to watch for the signs of the little things that we do that have big impact, because a lot of people may have just given the stuffed animal and not seen the signs and not taken them seriously, but you picked up on the signs and then just incorporated that in part of your life, which enriched both of you. And so I think that's one of the things we have to teach people is looking for the signs. And so much of the time they're just so simple that we tend to overlook them. What's one of your favorite memories, you know, from when Ed had Alzheimer's disease? Do you have one or two?
Yes, I do. It was most definitely the time that I took him some cards and letters to look at that he had sent me. When he moved to the nursing home, I'd put a lot of his belongings in storage, And I went out one day, and I was going through the things, furniture and clothes and personal effects that he didn't need. I was looking through the things to see what I wanted to give to charity and what I wanted to keep for myself and what I thought should be simply discarded. And I came across an envelope with my name scrawled on the front of it in his shaky handwriting, and I looked inside and discovered that it contained virtually every card, letter, and photograph that I had ever given him in 30 years. And I was so touched, it made me realize how much I must have meant to him over all the years, even though I knew it, but it was just sort of like icing on the cake. And so I decided, a friend of mine suggested that I take these things out and show them to Ed. And so I did. And I started with the photographs. And there were several photographs of us over the years. And the last one I showed him was a photograph of a woman standing behind him, and she had her hands on his shoulders, and her head was peeking around his, looking at the camera. And he looked at it, and he said, "Oh, she loved me." And he didn't say anything else, and I said, "What are you thinking?" And he said, "I'm thinking of love." And I said, "That woman is me." He recognized me always in person, but he didn't recognize me in the photograph. I said, "That person is me, that woman is me, and I still love you." And he looked up at me in my eyes like he had when we were romantically involved all those many years ago. And I couldn't tell, honestly, if he was in the past or the present. And I decided it didn't matter.
Yeah, good conclusion. Good conclusion. Because, I mean, that must have just made you melt. I have tears in my eyes hearing that. It's just like, wow.
It was beautiful.
Oh, very, 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 very cool. There's so many precious moments, during this disease process. And I think sometimes, we don't talk about them enough. We talk about the ugly side of the disease and the loss, but there's so much that is gained from the disease as well that's just absolutely, absolutely gorgeous. And that was a wonderful story. Now, with Alzheimer's disease, people have their moments where they're totally lucid, and I would imagine Ed had some periods like that too, where it was just very clear, and you wouldn't even know.
Right. Yes, he did. He had several, and they were always precious, and I remembered them and I treasured them, even though I knew that he would go back to his previous self. But one of the stories, as a matter of fact, I'll tell you a couple here. One of the stories was that my mother passed away when Ed had dementia, was living in this nursing home. And I told him about it, and he didn't understand at all what I was talking about. He said, "No, my mother isn't dead. I just talked to her last night." Of course, he was 92, so he hadn't talked to his mother last night, but he thought he had. And so I let it go. I mean, I could have told him that I had done my laundry that day or fallen down the stairs or gone to the dentist. It would have all been the same to him. He didn't understand anything. I was telling him that my mother had passed away. But 2 weeks later, I was sitting with him in the dining room while he was eating, and I had decided to wear a black blouse and slacks every day for a month in mourning for my mother. And he looked at me and he said, "You look so beautiful in that black blouse, even though I know you're wearing it for death." And that was his English construction. And I was just shocked. I couldn't believe it, that he had remembered for 2 weeks and that he had understood and that he told me about it. So that was one of the incidents. And then there was another one when I was I was in the process of searching for a new job, and I had a job interview, and I told him about it, and he didn't understand at all what I was saying. It was the same thing as before. He went back to reading the newspaper, which he was holding upside down, and had no understanding of what I was telling him. And a couple of weeks later, I had an interview scheduled, and I had to fly out to Kansas City from Cincinnati. And I told him about it, expecting him to say something like, that lady on the TV is the Pope, or things like that he would say. I was expecting that. But instead, he looked at me and he said, they will give you the job. You will get the job. I'm 100% certain. With all of your experience and your success over all the years, they will certainly hire you. And his voice was cracking. He was so happy that something good was going to be happening for me that he was almost in tears.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's powerful stuff. When you see those connections, were you taken back at that at all?
Oh,
or?
Yes, I was very shocked. Unfortunately, a lot of people can't accept the fact that their loved one has this disease. And I think that's what stops them from seeing these beautiful moments and experiencing this love and hope and joy. But in my experience, once a person is really able to come to terms with the illness, then there's a transformation, and then they can see the beautiful part of the person.
Mhm. Yep, definitely. Now, sometimes with Alzheimer's disease, there can just be this, deadly, serious issue that arises, but yet there's humor in the moment. Do you have any examples of that, or interacting with a person who's got the disease and how it flows from there?
Yes, I do. Again, I have several. One time we were sitting together. I used to sit with him when he was eating, and I was wearing some earrings, and he looked at me. He always told me how beautiful I was. You're so beautiful. You are so beautiful. How beautiful you are. And frankly, I was getting a little bit tired of it, and I told him, I said, could you please stop telling me how beautiful I am for a while? And he said, it will be very difficult, but I will try. And then he looked at me and he said, can I say how beautiful your earrings are? And then there was another story. I was sitting with him. He was in the habit of stealing the spoons from the nursing home dining room. And after he had his meal, he would clean the spoon with a napkin, and then he would wrap it in another napkin and put it in the breast pocket of his sport coat and take it down to his room. And pretty soon he would have spoons all over the place. And so the staff would come down and get them and take them back to the nursing home. But the next day he would start a new collection. And so they started giving him plastic spoons, hoping that he wouldn't find those appealing enough to steal. And it worked for a while, but pretty soon he started stealing those too. And so one day I was sitting with him as he was eating lunch, and he started cleaning his spoon to put it in his pocket. And I said, Ed, don't take that spoon. It doesn't belong to you. And he said, oh, no, I take them every day with no remorse.
And just, again, so clear, just, unbelievable. I think we've got a caller on the line, if you don't mind. I'd like to just see if they've got a question or a comment. Okay. I've got a caller from a 972 number. You're live and on the air. Do you have a question for us or a comment?
I certainly do, because I know both of you. It's Carol Larkin.
Oh, hi, Carol.
Oh, hi, Carol.
Wonderful show today, wonderful show. I called to ask Marie to tell the story of the violin guy.
Oh, yes, the violin concert.
Yes.
One of my friends, thank you, Carol, one of my friends suggested to me one day that I should hire a classical violinist to come to the nursing home and play a concert just for Ed in his room. And so I did. He'd always loved classical music, and so I did. And the violinist came, and he was wearing his tux, and as I had requested. He came in, and he sat down right across from Ed, probably no more than 3 feet from him. And he started playing, and Ed was ecstatic, and he was smiling, and he was moving in time to the music, and he was singing some of the words to the pieces that he knew. And after the selection, Ed reached his hand out toward the violinist, and the violinist took hold of his hand. And they sat there holding hands and making small talk, and then the violinist played another selection, and then the same thing. They held hands and talked. And at the end of the concert, I asked them to sit beside each other on the sofa so I could take their picture. And if you, too bad that you can't see the picture over the radio, but in this picture, Ed looked so proud. He was so proud that the man had come to play just for him, and he is just beaming with joy.
Oh. I love that story. It just, it just makes you feel good,
Yep. Oh, it is wonderful. So how are things with you, Carol? Anything new in your area that you want to tell us about while we got you on the line?
Oh, gosh. Oh, probably both of you know this gentleman, too. I want to tell you that I am now distributing books, the one that Max Wallach wrote, the one about the, grandma putting her underwear in the refrigerator.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. That's my newest project. I bought a bunch of his books, and I am now distributing those books to memory care facilities in my area, trying to get them to give those books, well, not give the books, but show the books to the children of the people who are, living there, the residents, for their children, essentially for the grandchildren. And I just started doing it yesterday, and the reception is just so fabulous. So that's my newest kick.
Oh, that's
cool.
Wonderful, Carol.
Yeah, that's a great book that Max wrote. Yeah, why did Grandma put her underwear in the refrigerator? For those of you that haven't read it, I would encourage you to go to Amazon or contact Carol and order a book through her. It's just a fabulous book that is for kids, but has an awful lot of lessons for adults wrapped in it. And just done very, very well. Well, thank you so much for calling in, Carol. I appreciate it.
Okay. Both of you have a great day.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
You too, Carol.
Bye-bye.
Well, that was nice of her to call, and I'm glad that we got another story out of you because you're filled with such great stories. So that's wonderful.
Yes, the violin concert was a special one.
Mm-hmm. Now, I have to ask, how did you come up with the title for your book, Come Back Early Today, A Memoir of Love, Alzheimer's and Joy? Where did that come from?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think we've mentioned yet that Ed was Romanian, and he had come to the United States in his mid-50s, and when he came here, his mid-50s, not the mid-50s, when he first came here, he didn't speak a word of English. But he learned, and he learned well, and he learned quickly. But he still, sometimes his syntax was a little bit out of order. His sentences might be phrased a little bit unusually. And one day when I went to visit him, he asked, when I got ready to leave, he asked me when I was coming back. And he always asked me when I was coming back, and I always said tomorrow. Not necessarily because I was planning to go back the next day, but because it made him happy, and I knew he'd never know the difference. And so I always said tomorrow, and he always said, wonderful, marvelous. But that day, when I said tomorrow, he got a hurt look on his face. And he said, what do you have to do that's so important you can't come back until tomorrow? And I was surprised. I didn't know what to say at first, but finally I said, well, when would you like for me to come back? And he said, today. And I said, okay, I'll come back today. And he said, early today. And I said, okay, I'll come back early today. And that's how the book got its name. And then the next day, I won't tell the ending of the book, the next day something very unusual happened. And it's very striking if you read about it in the book.
Oh, a cliffhanger, folks. You got to go get the book, which just rolls us right into how do people get a copy? Is it best to go to your website, or are you on Amazon? What's the best route there?
It's on Amazon, and on Amazon you can get the paperback or you can get the Kindle version, and just type in my name, Marie Marley, or type in Come Back Early Today, or you can get the paperback from my website, which is, again, www.comebackearlytoday.com, and so you can get the paperback either place.
Okay, wonderful. Any last things that you want to share with our guests at all?
Yes, I would. I just thought of a little story here. I mentioned that Ed used to steal the spoons from the nursing home. Well, he also stole the little pillows, as he called them, from the sofas in the lobby. There were not the cushions, but just the little designer pillows that they had there. And he always took them to his room, and the staff always went and got them and brought them back. And he would start stealing them again, and they would bring them back. Well, as it happened, when Ed passed away, one of the staff members had assembled most of his personal belongings in a special room for me to pick up, which was very nice of them to do. And I found one of the pillows there, and it was very touching and made me cry that they would have let him win in the end.
Mhm. Oh. Well, thank you, Marie, for sharing, such a intimate piece of your life with us. It's so helpful to hear other people's stories, and your love for Ed and is definitely apparent, and the rich relationship that you had. I just thank you so much again for being.
Well, thank you for having. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I just wanted to thank you again for just being with us today and sharing that with us. It changes people's lives. I know it does. And, again, I would encourage our listeners to, go and purchase the book. Again, Come Back Early Today, A Memoir of Love, Alzheimer's, and Joys by Marie Marley.
And thank you so much for having me today, Lori. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about my book.
Well, good. Maybe one of these days we'll actually get to meet live and in person. I get to talk to so many people, but I don't get to meet that many. I miss that part. So hopefully one of these days we'll meet at a conference or something. But you have a wonderful week. Okay, bye now.
You too. Bye-bye.
I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next guest, who is James Creasey, and he was just on the show the other week, but we have him back to talk about Jiminy Wicket in the World Cup at the Rockefeller Center, which occurred September 20th, just this last Friday, and he was out there raising awareness and funds for his through Hoops for Hope, which is intergenerational Alzheimer's-based croquet program for high school and colleagues and senior communities. So, James, how are you doing today?
Oh, Laurie, I am doing well, thank you. Pleasure to talk with you again, and what a delight it was to have you there at Rockefeller Center with us in Manhattan.
It was very fun. It was a fun event. Lots of pictures and video. You had a lot of variety in terms of people who participated. Can you tell us who all was part of the event?
Oh, I'd love to. Of course, you were, and I can't tell you thank you enough for all that you did to help push out our messaging through the social media. You know that I don't know how to do that. It was great to have someone as competent as you who could take that bull by the horns and get on with it. So thank you. We had the world's largest maker of carpet provide to us the artificial grass that we played on. A big thank you goes out to Bolu of America for donating the carpet that made it possible for us to have a lovely green spot right there in front of the Prometheus fountain in Rockefeller Center, where in the wintertime there is that iconic ice rink and the big Christmas tree and everything. So thank you, Bolu. George Bradenberg of Us Against Alzheimer's was also one of our sponsors, and it was a pleasure and a privilege to have Ginny Bigger from Us Against Alzheimer's coming down, up from Washington, D.C. to join us. And also our good friends, Tim Armour, Executive Director at Cure Alzheimer's Fund, and his crew, including Henry McCants and Rudy Tansey and those folks. They were also helping to sponsor and underwrite the event, although they weren't able to be there in person from Boston. I was expecting 2 young ladies from the Sigma Kappa sorority. We had about 10. They were hilarious. They loved it. They were so wonderfully engaging with the senior citizens who showed up. It was a pleasure to have their youthful, young womanly energy on the court. We had Carol Steinberg and Amanda Seekors from the Alzheimer's Foundation of America. We had Michelle Wang from the Alzheimer's Buddies program at Harvard College up in Boston. We had some seniors with Alzheimer's disease from Hearthstone Alzheimer's Care in Manhattan, and a number of folks from Brookdale Senior Living Community called Hallmark in Battery Park. We had the Executive Director of the National Croquet Center in West Palm Beach. We had the winners of the United States Collegiate Croquet Championship. And we had yes, indeed, the United States does have a croquet team, and we had David Malouf, member of the United States croquet team. We had Laurie LeBay from Alzheimer's Speaks. We've mentioned her talent already. We had Dr. Jeannie Pritchett, the International Medical Advisor to the Jiminy Wicket Initiative. And we had Sydney Oswald from South High School. South High School and Sydney Oswald were the very first to ever engage the Jiminy Wicket Through Hoops to Hope program in an educational institution. South High School in Denver has a special place in my heart, and so does Sydney. And in honor with gratitude to her for what she kicked off at her high school less than a year ago, she had the privilege, the honor of hitting the first croquet ball ever at Rockefeller Center in New York City. My gratitude to all participants. That's our kind of list. It was quite extensive, really.
Yeah, it was. There was a lot of people, a lot of activity. It was very fun. And Sydney was so cute, and hitting that first ball out, and just, I think she was surprised at the impact that she had as well, in terms of what it is she did. For a young kid, that was a big step, making a huge difference, and so you could just see her kind of bubbling with joy. I also saw the people from the Croquet Associations, both New York and national, were extremely impressed with how this went, and you had John Zeisel and his organization out there, and people from his home that were actually playing croquet, and it was just so much fun to see them engaged and watching them.
We had Stan, 92 and a half years old, came to play croquet.
He didn't want to stop.
For him, he did not want to stop. For him, it was I think it brought back memories for him of playing golf, and he took to this game in moments and was playing in a style that was more reminiscent of putting than it would have been of croquet. And of course, that's absolutely fine, because what we're trying to do is create a safe, playful environment for social engagement, cognitive stimulation, and physical exercise, and croquet provides all of that. And if for him, his adapted way of doing it is to play by himself as though he were putting, without actually ever sinking a ball down a hole, because there are no holes in a croquet court. They're just hoops and it stays on the surface. And that was fine. Laurie, before we talk about anything else, I want to say one very special and one last very big thank you to two dear people, longtime friends of mine, Roy and Faye Whitney, and the Roy and Faye Whitney Family Fund, who a year ago said, let's see if you can create a proof of concept that Jiminy Wicket and intergenerational high school and college engagement with seniors is something that could work. Roy and Faye have supported this effort from its inception, and they hold a very special place in my heart that's full of gratitude for what they've helped to make possible. And this is a milestone for us as we now take what we've proven in 2012-2013 high school year and move it into 100 high schools and colleges across the country in the 2013-2014 school year.
Well, that is wonderful to have people like that can see the vision and
absolutely,
and, help support this. It definitely is needed. So, yeah, I thank them too, because this is really a very fun game. I haven't had a chance to talk to our Memory Cafe. They played this Saturday, and I'll see them all tomorrow and hear all about how they went. But I know that they absolutely loved playing the game when we played this last spring, and we're all looking forward to getting together again to play once again. It's very, very fun. What kind of feedback did you get from people? What were you hearing? I was just hearing all kinds of positive things, and people were
Laurie,
taking
we've
pictures.
Got one metric by which we measure the effectiveness of what we're up to, SPH, smiles per hour, and we counted a lot of them. Hundreds and hundreds of smiles. That's the first measure of feedback. Even in the post-verbal silence and confusion of this disease, smiling is a way to indicate pleasure of engagement, pleasure of being with people. Even when I can't put the sentence together to say I'm liking what we're doing, smiling indicates it, and we saw a lot of that. The feedback from Harvard, from the Alzheimer's Foundation, from the participants in the senior living communities, the croquet people. I think you caught a number of those on some of the videos, where I think really everybody is hoping that we'll do this again next year, but there's no reason we can't be doing it in the meantime, and as you know, we are. 100 high schools and colleges coast to coast will keep this moving. But the feedback was wonderful, very, very positive, and like the high schools and colleges across the country, the common statement that I hear more than any other is, wow, that was fun. When can we do it again? Well, we're actually already cooking up some plans for next year and some more activities right here in Manhattan with an initiative called Aging in Manhattan. We'll see where that goes, and we'll keep you posted on our developments with that.
Wonderful. Well, that's great. Now, James, how do people get a hold of Jiminy Wicket if they want to learn more information?
Yeah, go to our website, very simple, jiminywicket.org, and there's a button there to connect with us, and there's plenty of information. There's some videos, some stories, descriptions of our programs, jiminywicket.org.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I appreciate you being with us today and giving us the update of your event. It was a lot of fun and a pleasure to be out there with you at Rockefeller Center for your inaugural event there. So you have a wonderful week, and for those of you that are interested in learning more about this adaptive croquet game that is wonderful for all ages, I highly recommend it for families, for communities, for school systems. It's absolutely endless how this game can be utilized. So please go ahead and go to jiminywicket.org, and James would be glad to talk with you, I'm sure.
Laurie, thank you so much.
Okay. Talk soon. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
In wrapping up the show, again, I just want to thank our guest today. Again, we had Angela Taylor with the Lewy Body Association, Marie Marley, one author of just a gorgeous book there, and then James Creasey with the Jiminy Wicket organization. Again, if you're looking for an Alzheimer's Association anywhere in the world, look for Alzheimer's Disease International, and you'll be able to find the one closest to you. If you are, if you're interested in Lewy body dementia, again, we talked about them today. Please check out their site. And next week, we're going to have the Frontal Temporal Degeneration Association on, or frontal temporal lobe dementia is what most people call it. We'll learn more about that disease next week. If you're looking for some games and some fun, remember Music First with Choral Health. You can take it on the road. It's now an app with you. And Puzzle with Me has great tools to sit down and engage and to be able to work together. And last, if you're looking for a trial, there's the Tau trial. You can go to alzheimersstudies.com, or you can go to the Alzheimer's team. Last, I'd like to mention, don't forget about the Alzheimer's Speaks resource directory. We'd love for you to join us on that site and to be a member. It's really easy. Just go up to the Partnering Options button, and you can go ahead and register as a member. There you'll be able to go ahead and upload free tools. But you can also put in resources, and there's no charge. So if you're an individual or a business and you found a great tool, product, or service you think needs to be shared with the world, it's very easy to do, and I would highly encourage you to be part and help us share with the world what is out there. It takes all of us to shift our dementia care culture, and we're making ground here. So until next week, I will talk to you soon, unless I see you this afternoon if you join us on Dementia Chats. That'll be starting at 3 p.m. this afternoon Eastern Time, 2 p.m. Central, noon Pacific, and 8 p.m. London time. That's where I interview people with dementia. They truly are the experts, and we really have a lot of participation from our audience in those. If you can't make it, that will be recorded, and I will be posting that link later on. So thanks again, and have a wonderful week. God bless. Bye.
It's time to rethink, renew, and reimagine retirement. Hey everybody, Jared Sebesta here, host of Retire Repurposed. Now, this podcast is about the non-financial parts of retirement, which many times can be even more challenging than the financial. We believe retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what could be the most impactful, purposeful, and fulfilling season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. To listen now, search Retire Repurposed on your favorite podcast platform, Senior Resource, or Life Audio.